Dinosaurs are still a hot topic for creationists to explain.
Have dinosaurs ever been found with mammals or people? Stay tuned for some surprising answers.
Biblical creationists believe that dinosaurs lived with people. On day 6, God created dinosaurs, or land animals, and people, so dinosaurs lived with people and lived with all the other animals. So according to the Bible, what we believe, what biblical creationists believe, is dinosaurs lived alongside all the other animals. Well, a question that has been thrown at us is, then how come we don't find other animal fossils buried with dinosaur fossils?
Right. And of course, when I was in school, I bought into the evolutionary paradigm. Usually you'd see a diagram like this on your screen where, basically they'd say, well, you only find these creatures buried in these layers, and then, there's an upward progression, and finally you get to the dinosaurs, and then you get some mammals, and finally you get people on the scene.
Yes.
So it's always that progression. Now, I know that that's not always the way it's found. There is a pattern to the fossil record, but a lot of times what we find in the ground doesn't actually match that evolutionary story. So one day I took 3 hours at the office and I went looking online, and I looked for evidence that showed modern type creatures buried with dinosaurs. So let me just share some of the results. Here's what they've actually found. The first article I found was called Cretaceous Duck Ruffles Feathers. Well, why did the finding of this duck ruffle these scientists' feathers? Because it was found in a rock layer that they believe is 70 million years old. So now you've got ducks living with dinosaurs. Then I found this one, dinosaur era bird, surprisingly duck-like. Now, I thought it was a repeat of the first article, but I kept reading, and actually it wasn't. This duck-like creature is supposedly 110 million years old. So this is 40 million years older.
Okay.
They say that the soft tissues were preserved, including flight feathers and webbing like a duck's between the bird's toes. It's supposedly 110 million years old. They called it a Ganzus, because it always sounds cooler if you give it a Latin name, I guess.
Right, sure.
And here's a picture of what an artist drew. But it's got modern characteristics like knobby knees. It was an underwater swimmer, preserved skin of the webbed feet. Again, this is supposedly 110 million years old, and they've still found that, the webbing and all this stuff. And I thought it was an interesting quote at the end of the article. It said, it may have looked like a duck and acted like a duck, but Ganzus was no duck.
There's a saying that kind of goes the other direction that most people might be familiar with.
Looks like a duck and quacks like a duck. It's probably a duck, but they don't think it's a duck because it's 110 million years old. So anyway, we don't believe in this timeline, of course, but we're just showing you what people have found. Well, then I found this one. It was a flying squirrel. Now, I used to work with my folks up in Pickle Lake in Ontario, Canada, and my mom was always trying to protect her pies and stuff like that from flying squirrels. Well, this flying squirrel is supposedly at least 65.5 million years old. So now the squirrels have been living with dinosaurs. Then I found this one. It was a 120 million year old platypus. And it's got the electrosensors down its bill. It looks like any kind of modern platypus. So now platypus have been living with dinosaurs according to the fossil record.
Wow.
Then I found this one, Easter surprise, world's oldest rabbit bones found. Well, this guy's supposedly 53 million years old, but the researcher who found him, Dr. Weibel, said he wouldn't be surprised if he went out into the field and found an 80 million year old rabbit. So according to evolutionists, they have no problem believing that,
he's open to the idea to having rabbits 80 million years old, living at the same time as dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Then I found this one. It's a beaver. It's a 154 million year old beaver. So now the beavers and the dinosaurs have been living together. Then this one, 130 million year old, well, they didn't know what it was, but it had eaten a dinosaur because the stomach contents contained the digested remains of a Psittacosaurus.
Pretty sure that it lived at the same time as the dinosaurs.
Right?
Then.
Yeah, and they called it a Repenomamus robustus. With, again, this sounds cool if you get a Latin name, but that Repenomamus robustus looks like a modern day honey badger. Now, basically what the fossil record is showing here, I mean, for those of you who are watching, has your age of dinosaurs picture that you grew up with all the dinosaur books with the volcano blasting off in the back, has it changed any in the last 3 minutes since we've been going through this? You don't usually picture, T-Rex walking along, you know, and quack, 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 and a dinosaur.
the skies, yeah.
You know, and we've just, you know, really skimmed through very quickly what they've actually found. So,
and you said you found all these in like 3 hours of just a simple internet search.
That's right.
Amazing.
Lots of evidence that you know, modern type creatures have existed alongside dinosaurs. So great evidence for what the Bible said, that there was a global flood, and that's where the creatures died out.
Who would have ever thought that scratches in rocks could disprove the biblical flood? Well, scratches in rock, called striations, are sometimes caused by a glacier moving over bedrock. Therefore, when geologists encounter striated rock, they often claim that a glacier caused it. Striated rock occurs within the sedimentary rocks that were laid down by Noah's flood. Evolutionary geologists claim this is evidence of multiple ancient ice ages, so they claim that Noah's year-long flood could not have laid down these rocks. However, we now know that underwater landslides cause rock striations similar to those caused today by glaciers. Furthermore, there are important differences between glacial deposits formed today and those of the alleged ancient ice ages. So don't let scratches in rocks scratch away your confidence in God's Word.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
So why don't we find human fossils with dinosaurs? Evolutionists say that, well, if you find two animals in the fossil record buried together, then they live together.
Right.
And you're not going to find a dinosaur and a rabbit, for example, fossilized together because those animals didn't live together, is what the evolutionists have said. Right. Well, we just looked at things that, well, maybe that doesn't work so well.
Right.
Rabbits maybe did live back at the time of dinosaurs.
Yep.
But what about human fossils?
Right. Well, when you really think about it, this argument, well, if you don't find them together, then they didn't live together. First, we want to handle that because, for example, coelacanths. A coelacanth was a creature 65-point-something million years old, supposedly. It was supposedly the creature that crawled out and, you know, became the land creatures and stuff like that. Well, they found live ones now. So now here's the point. You know, we don't find humans and coelacanths buried together. We haven't found that yet. But supposedly, according to the evolutionary timeline, well, we've coexisted. You say, okay, well, yeah, but humans are modern, so they didn't live with the coelacanths, didn't find them buried, but supposedly coelacanths and whales have lived together for millions and millions of years and in the same environment. I mean, you wouldn't really expect a dinosaur and a person to be living close together, et cetera, but coelacanths and whales, and we haven't found them either.
Right.
But when you think about people being buried at the time of the flood, I mean, we don't know how many people would have been on the planet, you know, from
we can
creation.
Estimate,
Yeah, you might say 10 million if you just do a calculation, start with 2 people and
basic population growth. Yeah,
that's right. You know, or 1,600 years after.
Yeah,
after
if we play with some of these numbers, what would the human population be in the land mass and so on, and then kind of work in, well, what volume of fossil-bearing strata do we have?
Right.
And we've done some of those calculations.
Yeah, so if you've got 10 million people at the time of the flood, and you preserve their bodies completely, every bone in the body,
every one of the 10 million.
Right. Then you'd find about one skeleton in every 70 cubic kilometers of sedimentary rock on the planet. So even if everybody had been completely fossilized, you're not going to expect that.
Yes,
obviously.
fossilization is a very specialized process.
Right, and the you know, skeletons get torn apart and things like that. So the chances of finding a fossil anyway, compared to the volume of other creatures and other species, we would have been completely outnumbered.
By all the other creatures that God created at the time.
That's right. So
yes.
it'd be hard to find them, because if you look at the fossil record, you've got about 95% of what we find is marine invertebrates. Right, then you've got about 2% marine vertebrates, and then the rest is plants and land dwellers. You actually don't find a lot of land-dwelling creatures in the fossil record. And so we're outnumbered. You don't find a lot of those fossils anyway. But here's the other thing. Scientists tend not to find what they're not looking for.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, here's a leading paleontologist, Donald Burge, and he makes a startling admission in Carl Werner's book. He interviewed this man. He said this: "We find mammals in almost all of our dinosaur dig sites. These were not noticed years ago. We have about 20,000 pounds of bentonite clay that has mammal fossils that we're trying to give away to some researcher. It's not that they're not important, it's just that you only live once, and I specialize in something other than mammals. I specialized in reptiles and dinosaurs." To me, this was a startling admission. He's saying, well, wait a second. we find mammals, when I was growing up as a kid, I was looking through my dinosaur books, I was thinking, well, you never find.
Yeah, that was a no-no. Mammals and dinosaurs living at the same time?
You're not going to find a rabbit, you're not going to find a duck with a dinosaur. I mean, they lived at completely different times.
Right.
Well, he's just admitting that, well, no, we find this all the time, but, I've got all this clay. If you want to go sifting through it and find out what's in there, I'm not interested. I'm just interested in the dinosaurs. I'm interested in what was living together at the same time, right? So perhaps, there are some human bones that have been found with this. They're not even looking for it. If you don't think it's happened, I mean, we don't know for sure.
Right.
But, here's a case where this fellow, Tim White, he thinks he's found a hominid, a collarbone. And so he's thinking about human evolution. He's found this bone.
Right.
Turns out it's a rib of a dolphin. We work with scientists, very brilliant people, but they still have to make guesses, right? And so maybe we have found some human and dinosaur bones together, but maybe we haven't. We don't know. But number one, just to recap, vastly outnumbered. You wouldn't expect to find human bones like that, and perhaps they have been found together, but
right.
Nobody's really noticed yet.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, stay tuned. We got some more great stuff coming up.
The reason that the Creation Answers book is so popular is because it covers a huge range of topics and answers more than 60 of the most asked questions about Genesis and the creation evolution issue. Questions like, what is the evidence for God's existence? Could the days in Genesis 1 be long periods of time? How did all the animals fit on Noah's Ark? Does radioisotope dating prove that the Earth is very old? Where do dinosaurs fit into the Bible? And many more. To order your copy, visit creation.com.
Okay, we've talked about dinosaurs and other animals fossilized together. We've talked about dinosaurs and humans together. Now, if dinosaurs really lived recently, right alongside people, which
right.
is what the Bible plainly says,
Right.
then what other evidences might we expect to find if humans and dinosaurs lived together?
Right.
Fairly recently.
If people and dinosaurs have interacted, then there should be evidence of it.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is you will often see sometimes people equate dinosaurs with dragons. You've heard creationists say that before. There's dragon legends all over the world from virtually all people groups. They've described seeing these huge reptilian beasts,
right.
et cetera, et cetera. And this has been kind of mythologized. But even in the World Book Encyclopedia in 1973, we hear this quote: "The dragons of legend are strangely like actual creatures that have lived in the past. They are much like the great reptiles, dinosaurs, which inhabited the earth long before man is supposed to have appeared on earth." So they're even noting this. They're saying, well, wait a sec. If people have these descriptions of creatures that sound like dinosaurs, call them dragons because dinosaurs is a modern word, that's kind of strange because dinosaurs and people aren't supposed to have lived together.
Right.
And a scientist and an atheist, Louis Jacobs, author and former president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, made this really startling claim here. He said, well, you don't want to associate dinosaurs with dragons. Why? Such an association would dispel an earth with vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. Evolution would be vanquished. That is huge. He's saying, wait a second, don't equate dinosaurs and dragons because that's going to blow evolution out of the water.
So if dinosaurs lived recently, that blows the evolutionary timescale out, which of
right.
course destroys evolution itself.
Exactly, and then you can't
Wow.
be an atheist because you have to believe in evolution to
Yes.
be an atheist. So what is some of the evidence here? Well, St. George and the Dragon, that was written as real
Famous
history.
dragon legend,
Yeah,
yes.
but of
Yep.
course, it's been mythologized. The flag of Wales actually has a dragon on it. Some of the biblical commentaries from several hundred years ago actually referenced people seeing dragons.
Right. Very old
right?
books.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Zodiac, the Chinese Zodiac, has all these animals that we readily recognize, modern, and it's got
Real
a dragon.
animals,
Yeah.
plus a dragon.
Why one mythological dragon? Marco Polo, he was a well-known historian, and he describes seeing these huge reptilian beasts, these dragons. Some of the artifacts we found, of course, one of the oldest artifacts ever found was this Mesopotamian cylinder seal. And if you look at the creatures there, 4 legs, big long neck, big long tail, looks like one of the sauropod dinosaurs. The head looks
Right.
a little different, but you don't know what could be soft tissue. You don't
It's
know
interesting
what it
too
looks like.
how they have their necks wrapped around each other that way.
Yeah, and keep that in mind because some other interesting artifacts they found. Of course, Dracorex. You did an article on that in Creation Magazine.
Yeah, little article.
And what does it look like? I mean, even the people who funded it here, there's a little sign down there. It says it's a dinosaur that looks like a dragon. Well, that's what we've been saying
to
all
make
along.
the connection between dinosaurs and dragons even stronger. I mean, here's a thing that looks
Exactly.
like a dragon.
Carl Sagan, once called the smartest man in America, of course he's an atheist, wrote the book Dragons of Eden, trying to explain why people groups all over the world have these memories of seeing these dinosaurs, but that they call dragons.
So he's not a Christian. What did he say?
Well, basically he came up with this thought that basically in our past, when we were just some greedy little mammal or something, we saw these dinosaurs, and it was so frightening that it imprinted in our memories, somehow in our DNA. And that memory got passed along till finally we evolved into humans. Here we are, and we remember seeing these things. But of course, we didn't live with this. I mean, that's preposterous.
And that's what he said in his book.
That's what he said in his book.
Wow.
He makes a connection between dragons. He says that many cultures have these legends and all that kind of stuff. So just astounding evidence. Cambodia. 800 years ago, they carved this stone column. You look in the center of the column, what's it look like? I do dinosaur talks with kids, 4 legs. You can see the creature's tail, the plates on its back. You got 7-year-old kids. That's a stegosaurus. Well, they didn't have dinosaur books and Land Before Time and Jurassic Park 800 years ago in Cambodia.
So maybe they had real live dinosaurs.
Well, it would make sense that that's probably what they saw.
Yeah.
Here's Bishop Bell, his tomb in Carlisle Cathedral. You see the creatures there. They look like dinosaurs. And look, they've got their necks wrapped around each other too, just like the Mesopotamian cylinder seal, separated hundreds of years chronologically and hundreds of miles distance geographically, and yet people record the same activity.
Have you ever wondered how Noah would have fitted dinosaurs on the ark? For example, how would a large sauropod like Brachiosaurus even get in the door? This question is often used to challenge the validity of the Bible, but new research has provided a stunning answer. By studying the growth rings in dinosaur bones, scientists have discovered that dinosaurs underwent a tremendous adolescent growth spurt. Take, for example, the huge Apatosaurus. Scientists hypothesized that their growth spurt started at about 5 years of age, when they weighed about 1 ton. During the spurt, however, they put on about 5 tons per year until they reached about 25 tons. The Bible tells us that God brought the animals to Noah for the ark voyage. Therefore, it's reasonable to assume that God would have chosen young dinosaurs that hadn't yet undergone their growth spurt. So yes, there was plenty of room for Brachiosaurus.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, another one of the challenges that evolutionists have thrown at biblical creationists in this, the history of dinosaurs, is dinosaur trackways. You find in the fossil record fossilized dinosaur footprints and even egg nests and so on where dinosaurs have laid eggs, and then that's buried, and there's another level that has the same thing, and that's buried, and there's another level. And they said in the year-long flood that you biblical creationists are talking about, you can't explain multiple nesting horizons. So, Cal,
Right.
how do we answer that?
Well, of course, the idea is that sediment was laid down very slowly over millions of years. So if you've got this here, then you got another layer up here. Let's say eggs, that was separated by millions of years.
In the evolutionary story, of course.
Story.
Yes.
But if those sediment layers got laid down quickly, you're not talking millions of years. All it did is it got laid down in separate events, not necessarily millions of years. So again, it's your paradigm, the way you're looking at this. Is that a bunch of time? Could those sediments have been laid down quickly? Many people, I think, have a simplistic understanding of what biblical creationists believe the flood actually did. It wasn't just an event where something popped open and water just came up and went down and that's it.
Right.
Of course, you weren't there. It's a one-time, one-off event. But when you look at things like the tsunamis, I mean, you look at some of the footage from Japan. When the tsunami hit the wave. Or there's lots of stuff online. Just go on YouTube and you can watch this.
So basically, we're suggesting that maybe a very simplistic view of the flood is not what we should be looking at here to explain multiple dinosaur nesting horizons. That the water may have come up in jerks and spurts and so on.
That's right, or even in massive waves. Like you look at the tsunami, you get this huge bunch of water and sediment comes in, and then it goes back out again, and then it comes back in.
Right.
That's one of the signs of a tsunami. When you see it go out and you go, oh, that doesn't look too good, right? Mudslides, multiple situations. You've got 40 days and 40 nights of rain recorded in the Bible as well. Some people think that's all the flood was, though. No, this is a year-long event.
Yeah, a little over a year.
Fountains of the Great Deep bursting, a lot of things there. Okay, Let's look at a scenario here. Let's say you've got some dinosaurs running along, and of course you got a big wave, bang, it gets hit. It's also going to get covered with sediment. It dies. Well, you've got the one trackway there that they were all on, but all of a sudden there's new sediments on top of that.
Rapidly deposited. Yeah,
that's right. And the fact that you can actually find dinosaur tracks means that sediment solidified very quickly, right? Boom, you've got another bunch of deposit. Maybe the water retreats for a while. That animal's still there. And then, of course, fast-moving water, if it went out and then it comes back in, it might start, re-gouging out the areas, things like that. Because one of the arguments is, how can you find a dinosaur scavenged and then sediment on top of that, and then another layer, and then you've got like dinosaur eggs, for example.
Right.
Well, when the carcass gets exposed, it gets scavenged, et cetera, et cetera. You can see that it's just not as simplistic. If all these multiple catastrophes kind of going along in this one catastrophe, you can kind of see that.
So we can imagine scenarios, and it's not too difficult to do that, and they're fairly realistic scenarios that would account for multiple dinosaur nesting horizons.
Exactly. Now, these multiple eggs, for example, at different levels, one of the interesting things about them is pathological eggs. Some creatures, when they feel unsafe, they don't lay their eggs. They'll retain them, and they'll start getting multiple layers around them, so they'll have multiple layered shells. Or if they eject them too quickly because they feel unsafe, they're very thin eggs. And what they've found with a lot of the dinosaur eggs that they have found is that many of them are pathological, and a much higher percentage of pathological eggs than you would normally expect to find in a regular creature. So
okay, so we would say that that's an indication that the dinosaurs were under some type of stress when those eggs were laid.
Running back and forth, and all of a sudden maybe drop their eggs and run away, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Also, you don't find vegetation with the dinosaurs often. So you find their bodies, but there's no vegetation in the layer. What were they eating? What you're finding is buried eggs, buried tracks, buried dinosaurs, and other creatures, but you're not finding buried ecosystems.
Okay, so that's the suggestion that maybe that layer has not been exposed for a long period of time.
That's right, before another layer got in.
Right.
Some of these dinosaur freeways, they call them, they're trackways. One of them extends from northeast New Mexico to north central Colorado. It's huge, again, suggesting this isn't just some river or lakeside or whatever like that, that this was evidence of the global flood.
The vigorous promotion of evolution as established fact is causing many Christians to question the biblical creation account, and some non-Christians won't consider Christianity because they believe the Bible has been disproved by science. That's where Creation Magazine comes in. Creation Magazine is a family-friendly publication packed with cutting-edge science that supports the Bible, presented in an easy-to-understand format by some of the leading experts in their fields of study. Visit creation.com to subscribe today.
Okay, for our feedback section, what we're looking at is an email. Often in these sections, we're looking at feedback that comes through the website. People look at the articles, or they have a question that isn't answered in the more than 8,000 articles on creation.com. So here's someone who wrote in about vestigial organs. These are apparently useless evolutionary leftovers from our evolutionary past, organs that we still have in our bodies. Now, creationists have refuted this many times. Yeah. There's a lot of details on creation.com. This person writes, "Greetings, I was wondering if you could write an article that refuted this article here," and he references an updated, basically what it is an updated version of the vestigial organs argument.
Right, modern vestigial organ arguments, so to speak.
Yes, that apparently haven't been refuted yet.
Right.
So off we go. Let's have a look at how our staff responded to this.
Right. So extrinsic ear muscles. The evolutionist said, well, look, some people's ears, you can wiggle them. One of my brothers can do that. Actually, he can actually wiggle his ears, which is pretty. It's kind of amusing.
Well, I can do it, but I won't do it now.
Okay. You can show me later.
Oh yeah, sure.
Well. So some people can do it, some people can't. And they're saying, well, maybe that's, maybe we used to fold our ears over when we were, more animalistic or whatever like that.
Yes.
But, because some of the larger muscles, well, you can see obvious uses for them. So what could these be? But, muscles, like when you don't use the muscles a lot, they atrophy, like an astronaut in outer space or whatever like that. So the fact that some people have it and some people don't, maybe if we all practice wiggling our ears, maybe we could all do it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Just exercise those muscles.
But it's in principle impossible to prove that a muscle or an organ doesn't have a function, because you might find a function for it later on. And
Right.
one of our own scientists suggested that perhaps the movement of the ear muscles can help remove wax from your ears, because your ears are constantly expelling that. So when you're smiling or chewing or whatever, or the ear muscles move, perhaps it's moving it out. But anyway,
Okay, so there may be use for that.
that's right.
Wisdom teeth is another one that's commonly thought of. Well, we're losing our wisdom teeth, or we don't need them anymore. It's a useless tooth left over from evolution
Right.
and so on. But wisdom teeth seem to only be a problem in most countries nowadays, where the food is soft.
Right.
In other countries, in some countries where you need to chew more for your food, wisdom teeth are not a problem. They're not a leftover. They don't cause problems.
So this indicates it's more of a
The dietary thing.
Dietary thing than,
Yes.
than an evolutionary leftover. The third eyelid, this evolution was actually suggesting that this is a leftover evolutionary, something like that. But it has a critical function. It actually secretes a sticky substance. When you get that crust in your eyes in the morning?
Yeah.
Well, this organ actually is secreting this stuff. So it'll, anything that goes in your eye, it wraps it with a protective coating, and then it comes down and then it's expelled from the eye. So it's a very functional piece of
so it's
equipment.
still very valuable.
That's right. It's not vestigial at all or useless.
Yeah, and in many of these cases, there's a lot more details on creation.com. We know that we're rushing through
Right.
these things here, and we're just trying to give an overview of some of these things. For example, why do males have nipples? Every once in a while, this person asked the question,
Yeah.
we're just answering the question. That's part of design economy. A good designer, if he designs two similar things, is going to try to keep good engineering from one to the other. And there's a question as to whether or not they're useless anyways. There's nerves that go there, blood vessels and so on. They seem
right.
to be a regular part of a man's chest.
Yeah.
And they seem that here's a possible function. They're involved in sexual stimulation.
Right. And no evolutionist is suggesting that in the past males suckled their young or anything like that. So
Yes.
it's kind of silly. Erector pili. These are muscles that, when your hair stands on end, when you're cold or you're scared, and they've said, well, why do we have these animalistic, our hair stands on end and stuff like that? Well,
Right.
actually, when you raise your hairs, it actually, there's airflow, flows differently. It actually makes you warmer.
It traps some air.
It traps some air, makes you warmer. So there's actually, and even muscle contraction itself helps you retain body heat, right? Now, we could go through a whole bunch of these, and you can go to the article online, just look up vestigial organs. But see, the thing that the evolutionists aren't understanding is creationists allow for a deterioration of a perfect creation.
Absolutely.
This argument actually falls apart, because even if you had an organ in the past that was good, and now it's worse or it's degenerate, that's not evidence for evolution, that's evidence for devolution.
Going the wrong way, isn't it?
It's going in the wrong way.